Puzzle box of the Damned: A Journey into the Heart of Hell. The antique shop stood on a corner in a forgotten part of the city, its windows clouded with the grime of decades. Frank Cotton pushed open the creaking door, a bell tinkling faintly as he entered. The air inside was thick with the scent of old books, polished wood, and something else, something faintly metallic and unpleasant. Frank's eyes scanned the cluttered shelves, searching for the object that had brought him here. He had heard whispers, rumors of a puzzle box that could open doorways to unimaginable pleasures. For Frank, a man who had long ago exhausted all earthly delights, the promise of new sensations was irresistible. There, on a dusty shelf in the back of the shop, he saw it. The Damnedn configuration, a small cube of intricately carved wood and brass. As Frank approached, he could have sworn he heard a faint humming emanating from the box, felt a slight vibration in the air around it. The shopkeeper, a wizened old man with milky eyes, appeared silently at Frank's elbow. "You don't want that one, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some things are best left undisturbed." But Frank was beyond warnings. He had come too far, searched too long. With hands that trembled slightly, whether from excitement or fear, he couldn't say, he picked up the box. It was heavier than he expected, and cold to the touch, despite the warmth of the shop. "I'll take it," Frank said, his voice hoarse with anticipation. As he left the shop, puzzle box tucked safely in his coat pocket, Frank failed to notice the look of pity and fear that crossed the old shopkeeper's face. Back in his rented room, Frank sat cross-legged on the floor, the Damnedn configuration before him. His fingers traced the intricate patterns carved into its surface, feeling for the hidden mechanisms that would unlock its secrets. For hours he worked, sliding panels, pressing hidden buttons, rotating sections of the cube. Sweat beaded on his brow, his fingers ached, but still he persevered. He was close, he could feel it. The box seemed to pulse with an inner life, growing warmer under his touch. Just as frustration threatened to overwhelm him, there was a click. A panel slid open, revealing a complex array of gears and levers within. Frank's heart raced as he manipulated these new elements, the box reconfiguring itself under his hands. With a final, decisive movement, the last piece fell into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a chime sounded, beautiful and terrible, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The walls of the room began to ripple like water. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an otherworldly energy. Frank watched, equal parts terrified and exhilarated, as a tear appeared in the fabric of reality itself. From this rent in the world stepped creatures that defied description. They were humanoid in shape, but their any resemblance to humanity ended. Their flesh was pale and hairless, crisscrossed with intricate patterns of scars and piercings. Black leather creaked as they moved, studded with hooks and chains that jangled with every step. At their head stood a figure that could only be their leader. His face was a nightmare of pens driven into ghostly white flesh, his eyes black and bottomless. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, filled with the promise of exquisite agonies. "We have such sights to show you," the pinhead intoned. Frank, realizing too late the true nature of the pleasures he had sought, tried to flee, but hooked chains shot out from the darkness, piercing his flesh and holding him fast. As he was dragged towards the portal, his screams of terror and pain were lost in the haunting chime of the box, as it reset itself, waiting for its next victim. In the days that followed, Frank's disappearance went largely unnoticed. He had been a solitary figure, estranged from family and friends. Only his brother Rory and Rory's wife, Julia, showed any concern when Frank failed to appear for a planned visit. Julia, in particular, seemed affected by Frank's absence. She had always been drawn to her husband's more dangerous brother, attracted to the air of mystery and forbidden excitement that surrounded him. Now, as she helped Rory search Frank's abandoned room, she found herself wondering what secrets he might have uncovered, what adventures he might have embarked upon. It was Julia who found the puzzle box hidden beneath a loose floorboard. As her fingers closed around it, she felt a jolt of something, a whisper of otherworldly pleasure, a promise of sensations beyond imagining. Without really knowing why, she slipped the box into her pocket, hiding it from Rory. That night, as Rory slept, Julia sat alone with the lament configuration. Her fingers traced its contours, feeling for the hidden mechanisms, just as Frank had done. But unlike Frank, Julia hesitated. Something held her back from fully engaging with the box, some instinct for self-preservation that Frank had lacked. Instead, she found herself remembering her brief, passionate affair with Frank just before her wedding to Rory. The intensity of those encounters, the way Frank had awakened desires in her that she hadn't known existed. As she caressed the puzzle box, those memories seemed to intensify, becoming almost tangible. Unbeknownst to Julia, her thoughts, fueled by the latent power of the lament configuration, were having an effect. In the realm beyond, in the labyrinthine corridors of hell, something stirred. Frank, or what remained of him, sensed an opportunity. The next day, as Rory was at work, Julia returned to Frank's old room. The house was silent, empty, but as she stood there, puzzle box in hand, she could have sworn she heard something. A whisper, perhaps, or the faint sound of chains. "Frank," she called, her voice trembling. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, a shape began to form in the corner of the room. It was Frank, but not as she had known him. His flesh was raw and bloody, strips of muscle and sinew exposed. He was a thing of nightmares, barely clinging to a humanoid form. Julia's first instinct was to flee, to scream, to deny the horror before her. But as she looked into what remained of Frank's eyes, she saw a plea there, a desperation that touched something deep within her. "Help me," Frank rasped, his voice a painful whisper. And so began Julia's descent into darkness. Frank explained that he needed blood to regenerate, to regain his human form. And Julia, driven by a mixture of lingering desire and morbid fascination, agreed to help. What followed was a series of grisly murders. Julia lured men to the house, seducing them with promises of illicit pleasures. Once they were vulnerable, Frank would emerge from the shadows, draining their life force and growing stronger with each victim. As Frank's body slowly regenerated, Julia found herself both repulsed and excited by the process. The power she wielded, the secret knowledge she now possessed, was intoxicating. She was no longer just Rory's wife, living a life of quiet suburban monotony. She was part of something larger, something terrible and wonderful. But their actions had not gone unnoticed. The Cenobites, the otherworldly beings, who had claimed Frank, sensed that their quarry was attempting to escape. Led by the pinhead, they began to stir, preparing to reclaim what was theirs. Meanwhile, Kirsty, Rory's daughter from a previous marriage, had grown suspicious of Julia's behavior. She had never fully trusted her stepmother, and now her instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. One night, unable to shake her fears, Kirsty broke into the old house. What she found there defied belief. Frank, still only partially regenerated, was feeding on his latest victim. Julia stood by, her clothes spattered with blood, a look of dark ecstasy on her face. In the chaos that followed, Kirsty managed to grab the puzzle box and flee. Injured and in shock, she found herself in a hospital. The lemon configuration clutched tightly in her hands. It was there, in the sterile confines of a hospital room, that Kirsty inadvertently solved the puzzle. The walls rippled, reality tore, and she found herself face to face with the Cenobites. The pinhead regarded her with cold curiosity. "The box," he intoned. "You opened it." "We came." Kirsty, terrified but thinking quickly, made a desperate bargain. She told the Cenobites about Frank, about how he had escaped them. In exchange for this information, she begged for her own life to be spared. The Cenobites, bound by their own twisted sense of honor, agreed. They retreated, but Kirsty knew it was only temporary. Soon, they would come for Frank, and for anyone who stood in their way. Racing against time, Kirsty returned to the house, determined to save her father from Julia and Frank's machinations. But she was too late. Rory was already dead, his skin worn by Frank like a grotesque suit, in an attempt to evade the Cenobites. The final confrontation was a nightmare of blood and chaos. Julia, realizing the true extent of Frank's betrayal, turned against him. Frank, driven mad by pain and the fear of returning to hell, lashed out at everyone around him. And then the Cenobites arrived, called by the power of the box and the fulfillment of their bargain with Kirsty. The air filled with the sound of chains and hooks, the scent of leather and blood. In the end, Frank and Julia were dragged back to hell, their screams echoing through the tier in reality. Kirsty, battered and traumatized but alive, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. As the portal closed and the lemon configuration reset itself, Kirsty was left with the terrible knowledge of what lay beyond our world. She had glimpsed the pleasures of hell, had seen the price of giving in to one's darkest desires. In the years that followed, Kirsty was haunted by her experiences. She researched the history of the puzzle box, learning of its origins in 18th century France, of the long line of victims it had claimed over the centuries. She discovered that the lament configuration was just one of several such devices, each designed to open doorways to different realms of experience, beyond human comprehension. The more she learned, the more she realized how vast and terrifying the universe truly was. Kirsty tried to warn others about the dangers of the puzzle box, but few believed her. Those who did were often drawn to the box's power, unable to resist the lure of forbidden knowledge and sensation. As for the Cenobites, they waited in their realm of pain and pleasure, ever ready to answer the call of those who sought to unlock the mysteries of the lament configuration. To them, time was meaningless. Pain and pleasure merely different facets of the same experience. The pinhead, once a man named Elliot Spencer, who had opened the box in search of the ultimate sensory experience, continued to lead his fellows in their explorations of the limits of sensation. He remembered his human life only dimly, like a half-forgotten dream. Now, he was an artist of pain, a priest of an order dedicated to the most extreme experiences imaginable. In his moments of quiet contemplation, the pinhead sometimes wondered about the humans who sought out the box. What drove them to such extremes? What emptiness in their lives were they trying to fill? But such thoughts were fleeting. In the end, all that mattered was the experience, the pushing of boundaries, the exploration of the very limits of existence. And so the cycle continued. The puzzle box would find its way into new hands, luring the curious, the desperate, the thrill-seekers with its promise of unknown pleasures. Some would resist its call, sensing the danger that lay within its intricate workings. But there would always be those who, like Frank, could not resist the temptation. Each time the box was opened, the fabric of reality would tear anew. The Cenobites would emerge, ready to guide another soul into their realm of infinite sensation. And each time, the boundary between our world and theirs would grow a little weaker, the influence of chaos and extremity seeping ever further into the mundane world. Kirsty, carrying the weight of her knowledge and experiences, wondered if there would come a day when the barrier between worlds would collapse entirely. What would happen then? Would our reality be consumed by the chaos and madness of the Cenobites' realm? Or was there some greater purpose to it all? Some cosmic balance that was maintained by the eternal dance of pleasure and pain? As she pondered these questions, Kirsty knew that her encounter with the Damnedn configuration had changed her forever. She had looked into the heart of hell and survived, but at what cost? The nightmares never truly faded, the memories of what she had seen and experienced always lurking at the edges of her consciousness. Yet she also felt a strange sense of purpose. Perhaps she had been chosen, not just as a victim or a survivor, but as a guardian, someone who could stand at the crossroads between worlds, warning those who would listen and fighting to maintain the fragile balance between order and chaos. And always, always the puzzle box waited. In antique shops, in forgotten attics, in the hands of the unwary and the all-too-willing. Its siren call echoed through the ages, promising revelations and revolutions of the soul to those brave or foolish enough to answer. For in the end, the true power of the Damnedn configuration lay not in its ability to open doorways to other realms, but in its capacity to reveal the hidden depths of the human psyche. It was a mirror, reflecting back the deepest desires and darkest fears of those who dared to look upon it. And as long as there were humans driven by curiosity, by desire, by the eternal quest for meaning and sensation, the puzzle box would continue its work, opening doorways, breaking down barriers, pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human in a universe far vaster and stranger than we can imagine. The story of the Damnedn configuration, of Frank and Julia, of Kirsty and the Cenobites, is more than just a tale of horror. It is a cautionary fable about the dangers of unchecked desire, a philosophical exploration of the nature of pleasure and pain, and a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. As you read these words, perhaps you feel a stirring of curiosity, a desire to seek out new experiences, to push beyond the boundaries of the known. But beware, for somewhere out there the puzzle box waits, and with it the promise of pleasures and horrors beyond imagining. The choice, as always, is yours. Will you heed the warnings, turn away from the lure of the unknown? Or will you, like so many before you, reach out to solve the puzzle, to unlock the secrets of the Damnedn configuration? Remember, as your fingers trace the intricate patterns of the box, as you feel the first stirrings of otherworldly power, we have such sights to show you.